Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Thursday, September 14th to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. Drew is in Jacksonville with the fam still, which is completely understandable considering some of the cleanup still going on from Irma. So riding co-pilot with me for just a little bit today will be Fletcher Keel of WCTV Sports and, well, just of CTV, wearer of many hats at Tallahassee's news leader.
Yes, and I very much enjoy hats, so a very fitting introduction, Ryan. Thanks again for inviting me back on Wake Up War Chant. I had a blast to preview the Seminoles season last time I was with you, and now we actually have tangible evidence, albeit as little as it is with unforeseen circumstances, canceling a game and postponing another one. But it's good to be back to actually talk actual football as opposed to all the preseason speculation.
And Fletcher's going to join us in a little bit to play a little bit of this or that because, I mean, I could play this or that by myself, but that'd be a little schizophrenic, and that's a tad strange, especially for a morning show. But, of course, we've got a great long interview with Ryan Clark, who did a lot of good work for us during Hurricane Irma, and, of course, documenting Jimbo Fisher's time at LSU in 2005 when Katrina, of course, devastated Louisiana and the rest of the Delta area, and also got a chit-chat with a couple folks who were tailgating. Actually came up to evacuate, ended up using their RVs in their tailgate lots, and it wasn't quite the party. In talking with Ryan Clark earlier, we had to pre-record that interview. It wasn't quite the party that maybe you might think, but people were able to evacuate. They were able to have a great place to get away to, and I'm very happy that Tallahassee was able to end up being one of those places. Fletcher, did you come out of the storm okay?
Yeah, everything fine. A lot of down branches from the trees, so all things considered, it could have been a lot worse. It was interesting to wake up Monday morning, and I thought that I'd be waking up with all sorts of craziness going on, and my cat at home would be freaking out with the weather, and it turned out, no, overnight it downgraded to the tropical storm. So luckily we were able to escape the worst. Unfortunately, for the rest of Florida, they got hit a lot harder for us, but at least this was a place where a lot of people had previously evacuated to, and it turned out to be a good thing for them that it was the situation weather-wise that it was.
As always, folks, thanks so much for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio, or, of course, streaming on your mobile devices, the TuneIn Radio app, and our own WTSM app podcast. iTunes, Podcast Republic, WarChantRadio.com, YouTube, however it is. We thank you so much for listening. Of course, your questions, your comments, your concerns, they go to radio@warchant.com and at Wake Up War Chant, which is our Twitter feed. And, of course, we can't do it without our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all in the heart of College Town. Okay, so once again, Florida State practice has not been opened up. Florida State media has not gotten a just opportunity to have Jimbo Fisher one-on-one. He did have his teleconference yesterday, and he did have the Jimbo Fisher call-in show last night. We are going to be able to speak with Coach Fisher today and actually a couple players. But in the meantime, I figured I'd share a couple nuggets with you out of Coach Fisher's call-in show, the Jimbo Fisher show, which of course happens every Wednesday night. He was able to give a little bit of an update on DeAndre Francois. He started a little bit of his rehab. There's not a whole lot he can do yet, which, of course, isn't that big of a surprise this stage in the game for him. Another thing that I think, and we got this question for Renegade Express yesterday. People have really piled on about this over the last little bit, and that was Jacquez Patrick's kind of struggles against the run against the Alabama Crimson Tide and things of that nature. Jimbo Fisher was asked whether he'll stick with the run game against North Carolina State. And Jimbo, I think, was very, very right to point out that Florida State kind of had to abandon what they wanted to do there in that second half. They had to pass it more. They wanted to run it late after setting up that pass, making you respect both sides of the ball, like any pro-style offense would want to do. But he said that they'll be balanced. NC State, of course, is really, really good against the run. with a defensive line like that, you would certainly think so. And I think that's one thing that more than anything else has kind of been blown out of proportion in terms of people concerned about that run game. People have issues about that run game. Jacquez Patrick is going to be a back that is going to be just fine against most of the teams that Florida State is going to play. It just so happens that a power back against arguably the fastest defense in the country is not a great solution, and it's not something that works out. And we do know that sometimes Jimbo Fisher should maybe play freshman a little bit more than he does, and that's in my opinion. I mean, when we found out that Cam Akers had a hot hand, Jimbo Fisher should have rode that a little bit more. That's just my thoughts. That's my opinions on the game. But that being said, I think the intention was to maybe show a little bit more of Amir Rasul. It was to show a little bit more of the talent down the roster on that running game. But Florida State just ended up behind the sticks, and they had to do what they had to do. It made them a little predictable, and that's how Alabama beats most of the teams they beat, by making teams predictable and getting a lead.
Right, and when you're playing Alabama, even though you might not want to say it, you want to try and make sure you have an early quick strike, or you know you're going to get down early and have to play from behind. And looking forward to NC State, they might be looking at that film and focusing in on Cam Akers, allowing Patrick to be able to have that breakout or re-breakout game, I guess. Also, I don't see why you wouldn't stick with the run game with your freshman quarterback and Blackman going out there after Francois' injury. If you want him to be active, give him some opportunities to see the defense on known running plays, and then maybe let him survey the field through the air. But I think in this case, with the new quarterback into the game, you've been off for 2 weeks, the run game is for sure the way to go.
I'm happy you mentioned James Blackman, because one of the other really interesting questions that caught my eye was he was asked about backup quarterbacks, Jimbo Fisher was, and would they use Bailey Hockman if they needed to, or did they want to redshirt him? And Fisher said he'll go with whatever's ahead as they needed, and I think that completely goes back to the idea that Florida State, considering what's happened with a couple of their quarterback signees over the last couple years, and they didn't expect to be in this situation. They certainly didn't expect to lose DeAndre Francois for the season in their first game, and now Bailey Hockman and J.J. Cosentino are splitting reps with the twos right now. And I'll say this, Jimbo Fisher said, quote, "You got to do whatever you got to do to win the game." And I think right now what you got to do more than anything is you've got to keep James Blackman healthy. Because it's nothing against Bailey Hockman, but we know what J.J. Cosentino is. We don't know what Bailey Hockman is, but I will say this. It does kind of raise an eyebrow to me that Hockman was the guy who seemed like he was more ready to go, the prototypical pocket passer. James Blackman was the guy that had a lot of upside but was maybe a little raw, and he's come in and has blown everything out of proportion, and he's kind of become the number 2 guy. And maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it's just that Blackman's impressed, but I don't know what that says about Bailey Hockman. I hope it's nothing good or nothing bad for his sake. But overall, I mean, listen, you were thin going into this position as it was, and now you are rail thin because you don't want to have to roll the dice again with another freshman quarterback, true freshman, I don't mind that, or a J.J. Cosentino who, once again, I hate to be the guy to pile on, but we know what J.J. is, and it's not good.
Right, and that's one of maybe the biggest bummer of losing that ULM game last weekend is you had a freshman quarterback in Blackman who was going to play his first snaps, but at least it was against ULM and nothing against Louisiana Monroe. But we kind of had a feeling that if there was going to be a trial game, that was going to be it. Now you open it up against a conference opponent in NC State, and of course the correct play is to go with whatever is going to win you the game. Every coach says that because it's true, but there's no reason to back out of Blackman starting now.
And I think the whole idea, though, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing in that you still got that week of practice. Mm-hmm. Florida State didn't cancel that game till late Thursday night.
Right.
Florida State resumed practice on Tuesday. If anything, they missed a day.
Mm-hmm.
This is almost a second fall camp. And the thing is, and we'll get into this and this or that in a minute, it's also kind of a second fall camp for the Miami Hurricanes. So that being said, you have to keep your eye that these two guys, these two programs have 2 true freshman quarterbacks that are going out there, and we have no idea what to expect from either of them. One of them played against Bethune-Cookman. One of them came up in mop-up duty in a game that was already completely decided, over and done when DeAndre Francois went down. We don't know what to think of either of them, period. And finally, before we run really, really quickly, Jimbo Fisher was asked about maybe being in that underdog role, maybe being a dark horse. And he said it can work in your favor if you let folks and the magnifying glass and all the attention go to somebody else, and there's less pressure. But he also very rightly pointed out this team still controls its own destiny if they can win out. Clemson's offense has not exactly provided a ton of answers when they went up against a defense like Auburn's, which was really, really tough. Louisville, I think their issues are pretty well documented. That offensive line still isn't great. That defense is still a little touchy.
Lamar Jackson's still magical to watch at times.
He is most certainly still that, though. They still have the best player in the country. Clemson still has a great defense. But that's also worth saying Florida State still has very talented wide receivers, and Florida State still has arguably one of the best defenses in the country.
Yep.
All three of them have their strengths and their weaknesses, and I think it's going to be pretty fun just as a football fan, not as someone who was expecting Florida State to come in and win this division like so many in this town and even in the media were. I think it's also just the idea that all three of them have super strengths and all three of them have really big question marks, but they're all very elite football teams, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of watch them almost on an equal footing battle it out throughout this football season.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as a football fan, you couldn't really ask for anything more, especially with all the media lead up being coming into the season being, oh, it's either Florida State or it's going to be Clemson. Well, now the doors open just a little bit wider, but that just makes watching the season progress even that much more exciting.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there was some baseball to talk about last night, so let's go ahead and hit it. This is While You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake me up! Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
Cleveland wins their 21st straight at the expense of the Tigers, 5-3. Brad Osmus still has a job. I'm as upset as you are. The Yankees end up beating the Tampa Bay Rays at the Trop 3-2. White Sox over the Royals 5-3 in Kansas City. The Oakland Athletics defeat the Boston Red Sox 7-3 in Fenway Park. The Bravos get a win over at Nationals Park 8-2. That's the Atlanta Braves over the Washington Nationals. Miami, what are we doing? We can't be losing to the Phillies 8-1, can we? That's your final score in Philadelphia. Baltimore defeats the Toronto Blue Jays 2-1 up in the Great White North 8-1. That's the M's going on the road to Arlington and getting a win for the Texas Rangers 8-1. 17-5. That's the Cubbies over the New York Mets. Drew's New York Mets last night. That's a feeling hurter. The Cubs of that team, I feel like everybody has talked so much about the Dodgers losing streak and the Indians winning streak. We're kind of forgetting that, the reigning World Series champions have looked a lot better out of the All-Star break and in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and baseball is one of those things where storylines in April aren't necessarily the same storylines come even June or July, and this is one of those cases. And with so much going on, it's hard. Sometimes you can get lost in the shuffle, and that's where the Cubs are right now.
Milwaukee Brewers win at home over the Pittsburgh Pirates 8-2, and the Cincinnati Reds blank the St. Louis Cardinals at home 6-0. When we come back, it's our own Ryan Clark on the other end on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio.
So much more happening on the campus of Florida State outside of the Champions Club meal on Monday. And our own Ryan Clark was able to document a lot of that stuff as we continue here on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. You know Ryan Clark. He's the lead beat writer of warchant.com. He joins me right now on the phone line. Ryan, how are you, buddy? This is the first time I've actually been able to talk to you. Is everything okay? You through the storm, all that?
Yeah, we were fine. We didn't lose power. We didn't lose internet. We were fortunate. We lost nothing. What about on your end?
Everything on my end, sir, went fine. We didn't lose power. We didn't lose internet. I mean, I was out in the field for most of Monday shooting, getting some footage and stuff like that. But, I mean, even then, just driving around Tallahassee, especially after driving around Hermine a year ago, you got a sense of just how lucky this area was to miss a lot of what people thought was heading its way.
I mean, it was just because I think anytime you think of hurricane in the state of Florida, you naturally assume the worst. And with Irma, I mean, look, there are places like Tampa and Orlando and Gainesville and parts of your hometown, Jacksonville, that got it horribly. And there are parts of South Florida that did too. And when you look at, I guess, what could have been with Tallahassee, I think for this place only had tropical storm conditions. It was easily the best case scenario.
Especially when you look to a certain extent, it didn't seem like it was going to hit Tallahassee at all, and then it looked like it was going to hit straight at Tallahassee, and then it ends up avoiding Tallahassee. I want to talk to you a little bit about your story about Jimbo Fisher's living through hurricane season in 2005, back when he was in Louisiana as the OC at LSU. But even before then, as I mentioned, kind of the unsteadiness. There wasn't really a bunch of ease about what was going on in the Tallahassee area, but at first it didn't look like there was going to be a ton. So folks who maybe were already planning to come to that ULM game, which of course didn't happen, ended up coming up, tailgating, and having themselves a good time.
I don't know if I'd really call it tailgating or having a good time, Ryan. These are people that they were fleeing because they were from places like Tampa and Sarasota, Punta Gorda. There was a woman I spoke to, Deborah Dees, a very sweet woman from Punta Gorda, who remembered the last time a hurricane came through her area, and she was with her daughter and her grandchildren and their family dog, and her daughter was crying because they still have family members back there. So no, this was anything remotely close to a tailgate. What it was for people was they had spoken to the boosters. They'd gotten a phone call from their ticket reps saying, hey, the booster lots are going to be open, and if you want to come as a way of seeking refuge from the storm, do it. And this is something people got a chance to do. And, driving around Saturday, I mean, yes, were people cordial? Absolutely. But this was nothing like a regular Saturday. No one was walking around in garnet and gold. I mean, yes, people were watching college game day, but it was background noise because they didn't know what was going to happen to their loved ones or their home. Or in the case of one man I spoke to, Tom Conway, I mean, he works I believe he works in the power distribution field. And so while he's worrying about what's going on in his home, he's got people calling him asking, hey, when's the quickest he can get back to help get people's electricity on? So it was just harrowing was the word. That's the best word to describe it.
And you'll have to forgive me, Ryan. I wasn't trying to sound flippant there with what was going on, but just the idea that people kind of kept their schedules intact in a place that was supposed to be there for tailgating. It was very fortunate for a lot of those folks that they were able to have a place open and have a place to go throughout that weekend.
Well, I mean, it was. And I mean, just one of the things that we also got a chance to do is we got a chance to speak with local businesses about all this. And one of the people I spoke with was a woman who is the sales and marketing director at the 4 Point Sheridan. And, one of the points she made was it was good for them to be able to lower the rates for people and have these people who, were going to come up anyways, have a place to stay and have a place where, for at least albeit a brief moment, they didn't have to worry about it, felt safe. And Guy Moore from Garnet and Gold was another person I spoke with. He was saying to me the story about how he had friends who were calling and asking if there were any magical, available hotel rooms that no one knew about. But I think the most descriptive thing he said to me was how he had gone to a hotel to visit some friends from out of town who were staying there, and he overheard someone speaking to the clerk in the lobby. Could they just stay in the lobby? I mean, again, just this past weekend.
Wow.
Yes, people were able to use Tallahassee as shelter and as a place to get away from it. But, whether you talk to the people at, Madison Social or businesses like Garnet and Gold, they said this wasn't even like a bye week or an away weekend rather, where people could kind of come in and, they shop and this and that, because this guy Moore pointed out, who's going to want to spend, money when you don't know if you're going to have a home to go back to. So, yeah, is it something that I think people used football, watching other games as a way just to kind of get a brief respite? Sure. But in terms of just, I think how they approached the weekend, I mean, this wasn't like any other weekend in Tallahassee, and I'm sure for them, they probably never want to go through a weekend like this ever again.
I would absolutely not blame them at all. And I think it's interesting, not to get a little bit off topic here, Ryan, but it was kind of interesting to see how the city of Tallahassee had to juggle that, because like we said, at first, when the storm didn't seem like it was in Tallahassee's path, but we knew it was going to go to South Florida. We knew it was going to hit probably Tampa. We knew it was definitely going to hit Miami and the Keys and places like that. A lot of those people evacuated to Tallahassee, and then when that storm looked like it might make a turn to hit the capital city, a lot of shelters and places that were already that were there as, refuge camps for South Florida, a lot of the folks in North Florida wanted to get there, and they were already full. So it was one heck of a predicament, and I think everybody's just kind of fortunate that it turned out the way it did here in North Florida. But, of course, like you said, still a lot of rebuilding to do down south.
Well, the thing is just, having friends and family down there, you're looking on Facebook and you're talking to people. There's one friend of mine who actually drove from West Palm Beach to Valdosta to seek shelter, and there are other people who stayed. And there's a family friend of mine, and they are family essentially. His wife's father lives in Key West, and they're having a hard time getting help and assistance to them. And like another one of my really good friends, he was out doing volunteer work, and he had damage to his home. So yeah, it's one of those things that I think it makes you certainly aware of what's going on. And, I think for the people who live up here, yes, they're certainly fortunate. But again, we all know people throughout the state. And, it's one of those, just because you may have been fortunate doesn't mean someone else was. And I think, again, that's the lesson we learn from all these hurricanes. Just because things may have worked out well for you doesn't mean it worked out well for someone else. Or if things don't work out well for you, you can at least say, well, while I'm going through this, at least someone else doesn't have to.
Ryan, you did a really good story on warchant.com yesterday about Jimbo Fisher and his role back when he was at LSU in 2005 when Katrina hit there. And, of course, he's had that, plus of Irma having its big impact this year, Hermine having its big impact on the Big Bend last year. What really did you learn from him and his experiences going through all these storms that he's been able to go through as a coach and a coordinator?
Well, I think the thing you learn is just there are experiences that you go through that you wish you didn't, but when you go through them, you try to make them a learning lesson. And one of the points Jimbo Fisher made when he spoke Wednesday was just more or less about how adversity helps teams, really kind of find an identity and help them understand, there is a brotherhood and there is a togetherness about going through something like that. So, of course, they went through Katrina, and then later that year they went through Rita, and he was just saying that with Hurricane Rita, there were players, about 20 or 30 of them, who lost everything they had. And in a lot of ways, Rita, look, don't get me wrong, Katrina was a hell of a storm, but in some ways, Rita was almost kind of the forgotten storm just because of the devastation of Katrina. And, Rita did a lot of damage, and it displaced a lot of people. And, and I think that's the thing that Fisher is kind of taken from his experience that he's tried to use here, is it's about making sure that everybody's families are doing well, that players are doing well, that everybody's in the same place, that, they're getting what they need and they can be taken care of. And, I think that's really kind of the biggest takeaway from hearing him speak was it's about how to control a situation as best you can, but also just making sure it doesn't get too out of control to where things spiral and it's something you can't recover from.
And while you hate to have that experience, Ryan, it's definitely helped Jimbo Fisher and his program as a whole and how they deal with storms and things like this.
It has. I think the reality is whenever you coach in Florida, this is something that you don't want to think about, but you absolutely have to. And when you look at the rest of the state, FAU and FIU, those schools decided to go ahead and play. Florida, Miami, FSU didn't. There was a story about, I think it was Memphis, that had flown into Orlando to play at UCF. I believe it was UCF, actually. And the second they landed, they learned, hey, game was canceled, and they got back on the runway and flew back. And so, it's one of those things that, again, no one ever wants to deal with, but it's something you have to keep in mind. And, I think one of the most fascinating things that was said during the ACC teleconference Wednesday came from Susan Miller-Degnan, who covers Miami for the Miami Herald. And, she made the point to Fisher about how Miami's coaches and players can't even return to campus because things are so bad. And, that even made Jimbo Fisher go, wow. I think it made a lot of people go, wow. And, that's just it. Again, we all talk about, the games and, what it means for depth chart X's and O's, and that's all well and good, I guess. But, there's also the human element to it. And, you're talking about people who, their families, and they don't know how they are. And when you think about Irma and the way it was going through the Caribbean, I mean, look, guys like Maven Saunders, they're from the Bahamas. DeAndre Francois, not only does he have family in Orlando, but he's got family in Haiti. I mean, these are things that, these kids, have on their mind. And so I think if you're a coaching staff, I mean, sure, it's about making sure that everybody on your team is fine and where they need to be, but it's also making sure that their families are doing well and giving them assistance in any way you can.
And, of course, it also works out in the idea that Ira and I talked about it yesterday because we got a couple questions in the mailbag. Should this game still have been moved? And it absolutely should have still been moved. I mean, heck, Sun Life or Hard Rock Stadium, which it's now known as, didn't even get the all clear until yesterday. And I know the game will be in Tallahassee at Doak Campbell Stadium, but the fact that Miami still can't completely go up and running and practice, Central Florida ended up canceling a really big home game out of conference with Georgia Tech. This is just one of those moments where regardless of what the damage is in Tallahassee, the state just has bigger things to worry about on Saturday. And I know Florida ends up getting the all clear to play Tennessee. I think that's good for them. But the fact that you're dealing with a team in South Florida, it's not fair or right to expect Miami to have to turn around and play that game on Saturday.
No, it's not. I mean, again, everybody's situation is so different. I mean, Florida A&M is scheduled to play in Tampa, but, again, like if Florida A&M can practice in Tennessee State, which obviously wasn't affected, can practice, that's different. But when it's Miami or any team in an area that's been affected by a storm, you can't realistically expect for them to say, hey, play, even though you've not had the chance to practice and, gain a sense of normalcy. And going back to what Fisher said Wednesday, that was another good theme really to take away, which is getting back to normalcy. So whether it's guys doing, classwork at set times, whether it's team meetings or practices at, regularly scheduled moments. I mean, it's about finding a way to get these guys back in the right routine. And, from that, you just hope to build some continuity. And, I think that's what every team hopes for this time of year, especially the ones who've gone through something like Irma.
Most certainly, Ryan. And as we look forward, just a couple quick football questions before we go. Florida State, of course, returns to the practice field on Tuesday. It's an NC State game. That's a noon kickoff. What do you expect to see out of this team as they kind of go through, let's face it, a second fall camp?
I think the thing is they now actually have a canvas to work from. Because I think when you're in preseason camp, there's all this buildup about one game. And yes, you have reference points from the previous season, but again, the cast of characters have changed. Whereas if now you know what you are, at least after one game, and that's more than what you had in August. And so I think what we're going to see from this team is just looking at, okay, what are those mistakes you made against Alabama that you need to clean up? So it's probably going to be a lot of emphasis on special teams. And it's probably going to be receivers being a bit more precise in their routes, but also I think it's probably going to be the offense as a whole, just having the understanding that, look, you now have a true freshman starting quarterback that, not saying you have to be perfect all the time, because I think that's unrealistic for anybody. No one is perfect at anything 100% of the time. But you do have to be sharper and be more consistent because, again, a point Fisher made when he was talking about first-year QBs is a lot of it's really about the personnel around them. And if they can give that player strong insulation, then that quarterback has a chance of succeeding.
Overall, Ryan, what do you expect to see out of James Blackman, at least as of right now? If you had to guess, you've covered him more than anybody. You, of course, did the great story for us last week. What do you think we see out of that guy come next Saturday against NC State?
I think you're going to see a big, precise arm, one that can make every throw, someone who has mobility. He's not a burner, but, he can definitely escape some spots. But I think the thing to kind of look at, because I've heard this from a couple high school coaches I spoke to, is just, seeing how he can read defenses. Because, again, they said he could read it well. But, again, there are tricks and things that you can get away with in high school that you can't get away with on this level. And so I think it's just going to try to be just playing within the system, which I don't see him or Jimbo Fisher doing anything advantageous. But I think it's going to be maybe a little bit more conservative. But as the year goes on, it's probably going to get more progressive in terms of the risks they take. So I think from James Blackman, that's what we should expect to see.
Ryan, thanks as always, my friend. Always appreciate you coming on and chatting with us.
Hey, not a problem.
All right, folks, we got more. It's right after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online.
How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table, Madison Social Central Township, all there in the heart of College Town. And everything's kind of back to normal in Tallahassee, which means that we're back to the best happy hour in town, 4 to 7, all three of those different places. It's 3 different experiences with the same great deal. Go on out there. It's Thursday night. There's some football maybe to watch tonight. Granted, it's the Bengals and the Texans, so it's not going to be great, but go out, watch some football, have a drink, have a good time. Sounds good to me, thanks to our friends at For the Table. All right, so Fletcher, I brought you in because, and we always preface this when you're on the show, are you a Florida State expert?
I am not.
Are you a fan of college football?
I very much am so.
Do you watch an unhealthy amount of college football?
I will plead the fifth.
Okay, so that being said, I wanted to bring you on because, like I said, we're doing this or that. It's Thursday. This is kind of what we do. We take a couple hypotheticals in the world of college football, and we go back and forth with them. So let's go ahead and do this. Worst start to the season, Texas or Notre Dame?
That's a tough one.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah, it is. It really is a catch-22. Notre Dame dropped that game against Georgia, who all of a sudden looks like they might be college football playoff contender, perhaps?
Yeah, okay,
Let's not go that far.
Pump the freaking brakes.
They looked really good, but I'm going to go with Texas because just what happened to them against Maryland, just almost inexcusable, and I feel real bad for Texas fans as what's going to happen to them when they rematch against USC come Saturday.
Yes, of course. USC, according to USC, has never lost that Rose Bowl game.
Of course.
The last time they played, because of course, that never happened. I don't know if you guys have followed that at all, but USC claims because it's a vacated loss, it never happened. So
it happened.
It definitely happened.
If you watched NFL Sunday, you saw that Vince Young running into the end zone replay over and over. It definitely happened.
If any NFL Sunday that Vince Young was playing for Tennessee or any commercial or anything ever, we've all seen the touchdown USC. We all know it happened. I'm with you that it's Texas. I get Brian Kelly. This is a really big year for him. As a matter of fact, we might talk about that a little bit later. But you can't be almost a 20-point favorite to Maryland and then lose the way they did. And, of course, USC kind of shook some dirt off. They kind of showed maybe that they were just hiding a couple things for Stanford that first week when they struggled, because they looked really good against a tree team that people love to love. People love that program.
Yep.
And they love that defense, and they love the fact that they've been the great spoiler in the Pac-12 over the last couple of years. But the fact that Texas just Maryland. It's Maryland. And we're not talking about not Randy Edsall. We're not talking about Ralph Friedgen, good 10 wins a year Maryland.
Right.
We're talking about DJ Durkin trying to save that place for Randy Edsall, Maryland. It ain't good. So I'll say this. Back to the ACC, though. North Carolina or North Carolina State? I'll start this one because everyone who listens to this show knows I'm not a fan of Dave Dorn, and it's the idea that, listen, you can't be giving up 35 points to a Will Muschamp offense. Period. End of discussion. I get it. North Carolina's 0-2. They blew a double-digit favorite to Cal at home. They lost to Louisville in a game where they gave up over 700 yards of offense. But we knew North Carolina was going to take a step back. We knew without Mitch Trubisky, we knew with a new defensive coordinator after Gene Chizik leaves the program, we knew it was going to be a bit of a reset button. North Carolina State's supposed to have one of the best defenses in college football. They're supposed to have one of the best front fours in college football. And they looked like garbage against a South Carolina team that people are way overhyping because they beat Dave Dorn and Mizzou.
Yeah, and that's typically how the opening couple weeks of college football goes. And I remember watching that UNC Louisville game, and it got out of hand quickly. I thought, okay, UNC might give Louisville a run for their money, maybe an even early season upset. And then Lamar Jackson did his Lamar Jackson thing. I'm going to go with you there, Ryan. I'm going to say NC State, not just because of that loss to SC, but they only beat Marshall by 17 points. And granted, a win is a win against a team like that, but Marshall was a 3-win team last year. And they don't return a lot of weapons. They didn't reload or anything with the incoming recruiting class. I smell a little bit of trouble. I think they'll do fine against Furman because, it's Furman, but I think Noles fans should rest easy, especially if that defense continues to give up the amount of points that they've been giving up.
All right, I'll cheat a little bit on my own this or that rules. How about this, that, or the other? Bigger win, Clemson, Southern Cal, or Oklahoma?
Going to go with Oklahoma. Going up, beating a perennial so far college football playoff team in their own house. Baker Mayfield going up and throwing the stick in the center of the flag in the center of the O. It's awesome, and it's not just that that Oklahoma won. It's the way they won. It's how much they dominated Ohio State. Clemson beat Auburn because Auburn's play calling got a little stale and a little predictable, and quite frankly, Auburn didn't push the right buttons. They were throwing when they should have been passing.
When we played, like you said,
throwing when they should have said running, I should say.
Yes, I was about to say, you're the Auburn fan. I got to ask, is the play calling always that bad?
It's always that questionable. There are times where
that's one way of putting it.
Yes, there are times where you're sitting there thinking one of these things is working and we're not doing it. I've never understood it.
I'm with you here. It's Oklahoma. I came very close to picking. I mean, you can make a solid case for any of these because there were so many questions about SC after that. There's just questions about Clemson in general when you lose a just generational quarterback the way Deshaun Watson is. Right. And I still think there's questions there. Mm-hmm. But Oklahoma, their MO for years, right? These big games. I mean, Big Game Bob. I love to joke about it. I think it's the funniest thing in the world. Lincoln Riley, I don't even think he's old enough to run for president yet. And my dude goes into the horseshoe.
Yep.
The freaking horseshoe against Urban Meyer, who doesn't lose games like this.
Nope, he doesn't.
And won. And not only won, he ran him out of the joint. Lincoln Riley's 34. He's got to wait another year to run for president, by the way.
There you go.
That guy can't run for president. He's the head coach of Oklahoma. He was born in 1983, and he embarrassed Urban Meyer in his own backyard. I'm with you. I think they might be a little bit more for real than I thought. Mm-hmm. As far as the Big 12 goes, I'm just ready for Bedlam. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma is going to be phenomenal this year. And considering the Big 12, the way that whole thing works out, we could literally get that in back-to-back weeks.
That'd be awesome.
Only a couple more questions here. Needs a win on Saturday more, Jim McElwain or Butch Jones?
Man, this is the question to end all questions, right? And this is a this or that I'm pretty sure you do almost yearly. This is my first year here, but I can imagine that you do this quite often. I'm going to go with Butch Jones, and I know that they are coming off of that win against Georgia Tech to open the season, but they were so out of that game for so long.
They were dominated statistically in that game.
And he has been the chosen one to resurrect Tennessee football for how many years, and they're still basically where they were before he came in. If they can beat Florida and if they can go on to win, let's say 9 games, he is safe and he's on his way to doing what we've been promised that he'll do there for the last, 5 years?
Yeah, it's been a while since – it's hard to believe Derek Dooley's been fired that long. I used to love to make fun of those stupid orange pants. But the thing is, I think overall I'm going to go with Jim McElwain. Okay. I'm going to disagree with you here just because – Butch is going to be on the hot seat regardless of what he does in this game.
That's fair.
Those folks love to hate them some Butch, and for good reason. I get it completely. But Jim McElwain, this was the year that this offense was supposed to be good, and the fact that Michigan whipped you the way they did and then struggled with a Cincinnati team that's rebuilding a week later – that doesn't speak very well of where the Florida program is.
Right.
I get it. Florida's going to be out for revenge after losing that game not too long, or losing that game for the first time in what seems like years and years and years, obviously over a decade last season.
Right.
But Jim McElwain, if they don't win this game, because the one saving grace is for any Florida coach, it seems like over the last decade that struggled is, well, they still beat Tennessee and they still find a way to beat Georgia. So, you know what? Florida State, we'd love to beat them, whatever. But we're still getting these guys. If he can't get Tennessee and Georgia's as legit as we think that defense might be, there might be some really unhappy Bull Gators in Gainesville.
Right. Now, do you think this is a case kind of like last year's Auburn-LSU game where the loser sees their head coach leave the next week, if not several weeks down the road?
No. Okay. I don't think either of them gets fired mid-season, just because the SEC East is bad enough to where they're both going to scoop up enough wins to where I think they both end up safe by the end of the season.
Yes.
But I think the seat just gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and the perpetual hot seat for Butch Jones might even turn into the perpetual hot seat for Jim McElwain, depending on how things go Saturday. Finally, benefiting most from having their game moved on the field now. I'm not talking about the logistics of going back to practice, because we already mentioned with Ryan Clark a little bit earlier, the cleanup in Miami is still going on campus. But on the field, who benefits more from Florida State-Miami being moved, Florida State or Miami?
Going to go with Florida State here. It gives that freshman quarterback another week to prepare, like you said, almost like a second fall camp. You said in the first segment today, and he's going to need those reps. They open conference play this week. I think it benefits them all the way, or in every way. It gets them an extra week of rest, which can sometimes lull you in a sense in a week-to-week game like football, but it gives them a week of rest after playing that Alabama team to open the season. I think this one benefits the Noles 100%.
I absolutely agree with you, and it's for the same exact reason. It's quarterback. Both of these teams run pro-style systems. Both of these teams have very good defenses. I would say Florida State's got an edge, but of course Miami, that entire linebacking core returning from last year, who were good literally as freshmen, are only going to be better as sophomores.
Right.
But at the end of the day, when you look at this thing and you stare it straight in the face, you say Florida State's offense benefits more from a prepared quarterback. Mark Richt loves to run the ball first. Even if it's a pro style, it's supposed to be a balanced attack. Jimbo Fisher expects so much of his quarterback, and to give James Blackman more time to process that information and get ready to go, I think it's a much bigger benefit for Florida State. And the idea that it's still a home game regardless. And it's still a home game. That streak still lives in the mind of a lot of those Miami players. That's where I think it plays into Florida State's hands. We're putting a bow on it after this. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Folks, we got to run. As always, my thanks to you, Fletcher.
Hey, it was a blast.
My thanks to you guys for listening. Mike and Mike is up next here on 97.9 ESPN
Radio. WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.